In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. I try to stay away from politics. I try to stay away from the news. It just gets me really upset because there's just a lot of stuff going on all over the place all the time. And it just doesn't make me happy, and I like to be happy, so I try to avoid it. Nevertheless, my aunt and uncle are visiting from Kentucky, Rhode Island, and they're coming to visit Eleanor. I know the Lucians that they're here to see me, or Diana. They're definitely here to see Eleanor. And my uncle just retired from teaching, where he taught history and civics. And he is very into watching the news. And we have had the news on in my household more over the last few days than I think I ever had in my entire life. And what has been fascinating, absolutely fascinating, has been what has been going on this week. At the beginning of the week, we saw Nancy Pelosi interviewed by Wolf Blitzer. And she would say things to him, and they just kept cutting each other off. And she would say, with all due respect, but, and then go on to explain something that was why he was wrong. And they would say these platitudes, we've known each other for a long time, as though that meant anything. Because by the end of the interview, she said, you know, with all due respect, I respect you, we've known each other for a long time, but you're wrong. And she just said, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And it hit me what was going on. At one point, she said to him, you are just nothing but an apologist, a defender for the other side. Fast forward a couple days later, and see Dianne Feinstein at the end of the hearings one day saying that these were the nicest hearings that she'd been a part of. She was impressed that things were going well, and she thanked the person who was conducting, Senator Lindsey Graham, conducting the hearing for doing a good job. And she said, perhaps this could give us an insight into future, God forbid, bipartisan relations. And then she hugged him. And it was an awkward hug, if you saw it. It was an awkward kind of COVID hug. Like you're not sure if we should be hugging or not. But they hugged each other. And there are calls for her retirement because Lindsey Graham is on the wrong side. Brothers and sisters, Christ shows us today something different than playing for a side. Christ shows us today to transcend those sides. And he tells us why. It starts in the epistle to the Colossians, where this comes at the very, very end of the epistle to Colossians. And St. Paul says, conduct yourselves wisely. Conduct yourselves wisely. Not to the people that you've known for a long time. Not to the people that you respect. To outsiders. The assumption is that you're already conducting yourself wisely to the people that you know. The assumption is you're already conducting yourself wisely with your friends and your family. You conduct yourself wisely to the outsiders. And why should we bother conducting ourselves wisely? Because as we hear at the beginning of this gospel from the apostles and evangelist Luke, he who hears you hears me. And he who rejects me rejects me. And he who rejects me rejects him who sent me. Brothers and sisters, we all know that actions speak louder than words. So our actions towards one another, conducting ourselves with wise conduct, are precisely the gospel message that others are going to hear. How we act towards other people, especially the outsider, speaks volumes more than how we act, than anything that we might say. It speaks volumes more than anything that might come from our lips, or that we might write, or that we might post on Facebook or Insta, or whatever we're posting on. How we act, how we conduct ourselves, speaks volumes. And we are called, brothers and sisters, to act in a way that preaches the message of Christ's gospel. And then something funny happens at the end of the gospel. After Christ and the disciples talk about all of the great things that are going on, he goes off alone and he prays. And he says, I thank thee, Father, that this revelation has been given not to the wise, not to the people who have studied, not to the people who have learned, but to babes. When we are being called to preach and to learn what it is that we are preaching, we have to be like babes. It reminds me of this beautiful passage in the 18th chapter of Matthew, where Christ calls a child to him and puts that child in the center of the crowd. And he says, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You will never have that conduct that others can hear, that will be your actions that will work. Unless you humble yourself like this child, you will never enter the kingdom. For the child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And why are children the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Because children need to be taught. Unless we become someone who needs to be taught, we will never be able to have that wise conduct. We will never be able to have those actions that speak louder than our words, so that he who hears us hears Christ. I'm amazed every time I feed my daughter. She can't even burp on her own. It's like a simple bodily function, but we have to pat the burps out of it, right? Because children need to be taught even the most basic function. And brothers and sisters, we need to be taught the most basic of functions. We need to be a clean slate that can be molded by the grand potter, Christ himself, showing us what it means. And that is precisely crucifixion life. And how we do it starts today. It starts today, and it starts in every single one of our interactions with every single person we meet. And it brings us to our practical points. When actions speak louder than words, you have to act like you are who you say you are. And that begins with respect. If we say with all due respect, that does not give us carte blanche and license to say whatever we want after those words. But when we say with all due respect, we must be speaking to one another with love, because you can't respect others without loving them first. So we must treat others, strangers, friends, and family, with respect at all times. And that brings us to our second point. That means we have to speak with love. We have to speak with love. We have to speak in a way that we understand that what we are saying, no matter how insignificant we think it might be, is a preaching of the gospel message of Christ. And that preaching has to always come with love. And then, brothers and sisters, that even happens when we disagree with people. We still speak when we're disagreeing with that same love. We're still showing that same love, that same respect to others, no matter what the conversation and no matter whether or not we agree with them. Because often we don't even know whether or not we agree because we aren't listening, which brings us to our final point. We have to listen with love. You cannot know what is being said if you don't let the other person speak. Imagine everything going on in the world today is going on because nobody talks to one another. They talk at one another. They talk over one another. They give simple platitudes, but they never speak with love, and they certainly are not listening with love. We often assume we know what is coming, and we base our response on the assumption of what is coming, not on the actual things that are said. Listening with love means that we strive to hear what is being said by the others. So that when we are speaking, they are striving to hear us. Because remember, brothers and sisters, he who hears you hears me. May our great God teach us how to love one another and give us the strength to show his love to others through our discourse. Amen.